First, we've got Dan Nelson, founder and CEO of Grow Computer, which is building digital tools for the farms of the future. Dan,
Let's
you want to
go.
start us off?
Thank you so much for having me, Julie. Thank you for the great introduction with Peter. Thank you, as always, for all of the support and putting this whole thing together. It's an honor to be here, and it's an honor to kick this off. So my name is Daniel L. Nelson. I am the co-founder and CEO of a company called Grow Computer, which I'm going to talk about in a minute. But before that, I have to say that I'm a recovering accountant. And I've been a CPA and a virtual CFO and worked with dozens and dozens and dozens of startups. And have identified a lot of these trends that emerging companies need to understand, and then applied those trends to a lens of ag tech and the global food economy. And so earlier this year, I published a white paper called The Economics of the Future of Food, where I identified 9 really exciting macro important trends that are happening all over the world across 3 factors that every business that's starting now is going to need to take into consideration. And so, because we don't have the full time, I think I'm going to highlight just a couple of those. And the reason why I like to highlight these is that while we want change, and everybody wants change in the food system, we want things that are cheaper, healthier, less expensive, less externalities. To me, in order for any of this change to happen, we have to help entrepreneurs build better businesses. We have to allow them to build businesses that they can deliver products to their end consumers at a comparable market rate for what's happening in traditional agriculture. And so in order to do that, I've started to think about these different lenses that we could look at. And the first one that's obviously the most interesting is the money that's pouring into this world right now. From any metric that we look at around the world, there's more dollars and focus both on an investment, but also a consumption level going into agriculture than ever before. One of my favorite stats and concepts is this idea of the rising billions. Right now, there's about 7 billion people on the planet, but that concept says that over the next 10 to 20 years, over 1 billion people of that 7 billion are going to be leaving economic hardship and joining a middle class. And while that's important, what really that's super interesting about is the purchasing power of that next billion people. Because as incomes rise, people want more fresh fruit, food, and produce. And so as people are leaving economic hardship and joining more the middle class, they want more local fresh food. And so this is opening up new local opportunities in countries all over the world. Additionally, the United States and the rest of the world have started increasing their ag investment tremendously. I'm not sure if anyone's familiar with this, but the projected agricultural investments of direct payments for the United States government this year in 2021 is going to be almost $50 billion. Last year in 2020, it was about 20. So we're looking at almost a 250% increase in direct payments to farmers. So there's money coming in both from the investment, from the government side and the consumption side. So there's a lot of economic opportunities that entrepreneurs are trying to attack. The next trend that really excites me and is where we come in with Grow Computer is on the technology and digitization of this entire space. If you look at kind of the history of agriculture, which many here have, a lot of folks are calling what's going on now the 4th agricultural revolution. And why that's happening is because the digitization of the physical world is allowing entirely new ways of monitoring, operating, distributing, and selling the crops that are generated. And so at Grow Computer, our job is to digitize all of the different signals, whether it's video, air temperature, water temperature, energy, electricity, safety and compliance, into one platform that makes this information usable to the grower and the farmer, but usable in context of everything else going on. Technologically speaking, IoT, which is a huge opportunity in itself, is really challenging and complicated. And so essentially, none of these components, when you buy them from a manufacturer, necessarily talk to anything else. And so there's a lot of data that's just missing in between. And so what we're working on is creating more robust and consistent data sets to allow any 2 farms around the world to communicate to each other. And that type of consistency in the platform of digital tools will allow, we believe, an entirely new market of software proliferation, where if there's a consistency in the back end that any two farms can use, now an engineer at a PhD program anywhere in the world can write an algorithm to optimize how a farm can grow a tomato or the perfect tomato given these considerations. And our software is going to be able to implement that. And so that's really exciting. Looking at the revenue side, for me, what's super neat about COVID as a whole, and this concept is not mine, it's by a NYU business professor, Scott Galloway, around dispersion. And it's really neat because dispersion to me shows how a lot of the trends are going directly from the buyer to the seller. And so what we're going to get to is you're going to allow farmers to sell directly to their consumers, or remove some of the more traditional gatekeepers that exist in that supply chain from growth to distribution. And at each of those levels, when you strip out someone else that sits in between the seller and the buyer, you're able to reduce the price for the buyer and increase the economics for the seller. And so as models and digitization is happening, where a farmer, where I could go buy coffee from a Colombian farmer directly from the farmer, that's a very different model. And I think as the technology starts to continue to evolve and more folks are connected, we're going to see really exciting new trends in this space. And then lastly, since this is the Green Wall Street Summit, and we were just talking about this, on a cost side, energy is such a fascinating input into the world of ag tech. We come from a background of indoor controlled environments and vertical farming, and that is sweeping the world. I've spoken to folks in 6 of the 7 continents that are trying to build almost exactly the same farms to sell to their local communities. But the challenge that's always a secondary or tertiary thought for many of these folks is how much energy they're consuming and how they're going to be able to scale their operations with the energy considerations. While we all love the idea of operating a vegetable farm in a warehouse, and I think it's super cool because you're creating a fake environment that's perfectly suited to grow plants, which is kind of ironic because it's, a warehouse. My challenge is how much energy is needed to keep that facility running 24/7. What kind of tolls on the grid are going to be needed to keep that type of energy generation consistent? Because with many of these vertical farm situations, if the power cuts out, we're really losing all life support for these plants. And so some of these systems, in a matter of hours, if there's a rolling blackout in an area with a less than robust energy grid, the whole farm is going to be lost. You're going to lose an entire production run, and you're going to have costs of cleaning things out, restarting, fixing. And so it really kind of dials down to this fundamental question that I love thinking about, is energy. And so when you look at calories are just a measure of energy, but so is watts, and so are joules. And so if you're thinking about building a farm where you're using any energy source, essentially what you're doing is converting watts to calories. And the challenge is that is a very inefficient conversion, right? Because you have to generate the power, you have to distribute the power, you have to operate it within the farm, and then you're converting it into a head of lettuce. And so if you start thinking of food as almost these water and energy batteries that we're transporting around the world, if you start thinking about, we're going to put vertical farms all over Africa because we think it's going to be the secret to feeding people, I would caution you on that. Because the power grids that are going to be needed and the power generation that needs to be able to support just that food factory in an artificial environment is challenging. And so thinking about these types of projects and the CapEx that you're looking at, don't forget energy. And coming back to greenhouses versus vertical farms, when you can use the most abundant, free, and perfectly suited to growing plants energy source that we have, which is obviously solar energy, but you also want to start to optimize those environments. I think that is going to be the final trend where we're going to see a lot of interesting opportunities of greenhouses and controlled spaces where you are using natural energy sources, but also trying to optimize the environment within that to create a really effective and accretive model for creating food and nutrition going forward. And so this whole presentation is much longer and much more interesting. My email is right here, sorry, dan@growcomputer.com. I am more than happy to share it out with anybody. But thank you again for the time here. I hope this is a great way to kick off the rest of the amazing conversations that we're going to have. And I look forward to answering any questions that y'all have.
Dan, thanks so much. And I would encourage everyone to use the Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Type in questions that I can share with Dan. We'd love to hear from you. Dan, keeping on this theme of energy, I have to ask, how do you expect the new administration policies to affect you and your company?
Interestingly enough, I don't think our effects are going to be had. Really what Grow Computer is trying to do is to give everybody access to this digital infrastructure. For example, you look at an Aero Farms, a Bowery Farms, they built really robust solutions for their own self. But there are millions and millions of people around the world that are entrepreneurs, that are second career people. And by that, it's someone like me, who was an accountant in the past, but really got excited about urban food systems. How do you give those people the tools to operate a modern and effective and nimble farm business is really what we're doing. And so the energy sources are considerations where, as we get more and more development of new types of grid solutions and new types of monitoring, where we see ourselves interacting is, how do we give the grower the ability to interface with the utility? So for example, we have already API integrations with many of the United States energy providers. And so as you're thinking about growing indoors, where you are consuming amounts of energy in a consistent way, how do you start to think about that as not a 24-hour day as we experience it, but maybe a time shifted 24-hour day, where because of the energy rates at Con Edison, where at 7 p.m., after a lot of the office air conditioners are shut down and they have extra energy, how do you work with those energy companies to take advantage of those changes in their demand to use that extra supply as an input into your farm? And I think that is going to be a really exciting opportunity, and especially if you could start to network multiple farms together, where you could arbitrage energy hyper locally and put it into these food systems.
Yeah, that makes sense. We have a question come in from Vicky. She's asking, she's stating that major funding, which we know continues to flow into greenhouse projects. What projects are you aware of that follow the direction that you are going specifically?
Absolutely. Well, so we work with a lot of smaller growers, and I think that speaks to our culture. But we also are helping some really exciting farms in the Northeast trying to think about their consistency. So for us with larger farms, because we're able to digitize all this information, where we see a value to them is, how do you optimize your system so that you can grow 50 pounds of kale every week going forward? Because the consistency of the production is really important. And so there is this kind of fallacy of farm production, where if you produce it, it doesn't mean you're going to sell it, right? If you try to sell a melon after you grow it, you have a very short, narrow timeline to grow it. And so the answer is to have these consistencies in contracts where you can consistently deliver X amount of produce every week. And so optimization of that. And then a smart greenhouse project in the States that I absolutely love is what App Harvest is doing in Kentucky. For those that don't know, they were just recently taken public in a SPAC, which is super cool to see. But App Harvest is run by a really smart group of entrepreneurs, where they identified that Eastern Kentucky, where there's a lot of land, a lot of desire to build the infrastructure, but most interestingly, it's within a 24-hour drive to about half of the US population. And so they were able to get a huge tract of land,
build a 100-acre smart greenhouse, and we're going to start growing melons, peppers, cucumbers, and a little bit more value-add production. And I think that's a really, really exciting one. And the other part that I forgot, the really key point, is that the energy conversion, last thing about, is when you're going ahead of lettuce, the energy grows almost 100% of the biomass that you eat. So, when you grow a head of lettuce, you eat the whole thing. But when you grow a tomato plant, you grow a lot of biomass, but you don't eat about 80% of it. And so when you think about that energy conversion, it's not even a one-to-one on biomass conversion. It's this derivative effect where how do you start to minimize how much plant matter you're growing to maximize the fruit? There's cool stuff in CRISPR and all that stuff, but
Right.
it's really those types of considerations of pulling the levers that entrepreneurs need to figure out how to optimize to build the better businesses.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. A bunch of questions coming in. I'll try and get to as many as we can. A question about battery technology. Are you using that at all?
So for us, our job is to connect to the inputs as much as the grower wants. And so we work with a couple batteries and actually solar inverters. But the idea is that if we can know how much energy your solar power is getting, which is one system, we know how much energy is in your battery, and we know how much energy your farm consumes. Our goal is to be able to give you the tools to be able to optimize when and how you're growing. I think that there's this first level effect of going 0 to 1 on bits to atoms and back. And then the next level effect is once you get all that digital information in one place that's usable, now how do you layer on artificial intelligence algorithms to grow whatever or optimize your energy? And so that's a little bit derivative for us at this point, actually.
So are you feeling that these critical, really important innovations that you are doing yourself and that we're seeing in this sector, is it in conflict with the old industry process and technique? And what's the pushback? I mean, for example, if we are cutting out the middleman and buying directly from these farmers, where does that leave the big distribution industries?
And it's a multifaceted angle, and I think that's why it was so exciting to come to this summit, because we're addressing how the price of food from traditional versus controlled systems affects energy and sustainability, and it's a fight. You think about bananas as a loss leader in your supermarket because they know that it keeps people coming in. So when you see bananas that are 59 cents, that's not how much it costs to grow the banana. You talk about all of the traditional terrible things that were done to get that price there. It's on us to fix it. And there's a lot of inertia from incumbents, but that's why the 2020s are so exciting. Whether it's digital technology like what we're doing, new models of distribution and reach, but new demand and new access. And so I think it's on us, the people here thinking about these businesses, to solve that question. And if you could do a better job of creating a better product with more value at a better price, you're probably going to start to see a lot of really good results in the short and long term.
Yeah. So we have about a minute left. I wanted to touch on the fact that, yes, there's been a lot of money going into ag investments over the last few years in particular, but there's still a lot of capital on the sidelines. And we know that a lot of investors are really hesitant with anything that has the word tech in it. If you attach tech to ag or tech to finance. And so how can we really encourage this flow of capital into this industry?
Support your local farmer. Support local businesses that you believe in. If you can spend $1 more on a better piece of produce from your farmer's market, that's the way to do it. Because at the end of the day, we like to talk about policy and we like to talk about these academic ideas, but our wallets do the talking in a lot of ways. And so if we don't change how we think about where our food comes from, if we don't think about where we purchase things, the businesses that we're trying to elicit and support and grow won't have the access to resources. And I know from my time as a, working with startups, the best way to get more resources is to prove your results today. And so if you can show that your message works, that's how you can start to level up. And it's on us to show that it works in aggregate, not just on an individual basis.
So would you say that's your biggest challenge, that proof point?
It's always the biggest challenge. And I think there's always incumbents. And so, but also, for us, you got to think almost, we are picks and shovels. And so people don't necessarily want the technology we want, it's the product that you're getting. And so it's not, I use a slide in my class and I'll end it with here. It's that if you're thinking, for anybody out here, and you're thinking about selling something to your customer, I use a slide where you have Little Mario, Fire Flower, and Fireball Mario. And while we are building the Fire Flower, right, that is our product and our technology, what we have to keep in mind is how the person that we are selling to, it becomes Fireball Mario with our power. And so it's really figuring out the branding, the value, the messaging, and the product itself to help people build their own businesses and consume things more effectively. And that's where we are, and that's what we're trying to do.